Okay, I think we'll wait another minute and then get started, everybody.
All right. Well, yeah, thanks for folks for joining us. I see a couple folks on the call here that I know had a big part in what we're celebrating tonight. So Kim McDonald from Fish Not Gold. Thanks, Kim, for joining us. Awesome. And then I see Crystal Elliot is with us from Trout Unlimited. Thank you, Crystal. She'll be talking a little bit later. I recognize Derek Young from Trout Unlimited on the east side. Thanks, Derek, for joining us. And I think we'll have some other folks that will join us as well. Well, I was happy to see the sun, but 83 degrees, that's a little warm for me. I'm kind of a polar bear. I like 78, but can't be picky.
I'm with you, man. March temperature is just right for me.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever. Take it as it comes. At least it's not raining.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I think that we'll get going here. I think we've given everyone enough time to jump on. So welcome everyone to the next installment of Washington Wild's Virtual Happy Hour series. We're so excited for you to join us in celebrating a huge victory for salmon habitat around the state of Washington. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the motorized suction dredge mining issue and the recent restrictions put in place by our state government. And throughout, this happy hour, we're going to be hearing from some of our partners, Travis at GRAYL. Thank you so much for being with us. Crystal Elliot with Trout Unlimited. And then we're going to be hearing a presentation from our executive director, Tom, about this issue. I should also say my name's Chris Chappell. I'm the Conservation and Brew Shed Program Manager over at Washington Wild. Thank you again for joining us. I hope you all have a tasty beverage on hand. I'm drinking LaCroix because I'm on the clock and can't be enjoying a beer just yet. But we're going to start this off by showing a short video about Washington Wild and some of the work that we're doing around the state. So, hope you enjoy.
On a September evening in 1979, a handful of conservation activists met at the College Inn in Seattle's University District. Hours later, a new organization was born, Washington Wilderness Coalition.
So I've lived in Washington State for 30 years, and it is a diverse state in that it has the Pacific Ocean, mountains, rainforests, deserts, lakes, rivers. Washington Wild is a local organization that protects all of that for all of us. And that is why I'm a proud volunteer for the Washington Wild organization.
Today known as Washington Wild, over the past 40 years, the organization has led efforts to protect nearly 3 million acres of designated wilderness throughout Washington State.
I'm Yvonne Krause. I'm the Executive Director of the Evergreen Mountain Bike Alliance. We as mountain bikers have been working with Washington Wild on a very unique challenge of wanting to support wilderness and supporting that in Washington State, and at the same time losing access when we do so. So it's a unique challenge for us as mountain bikers. It's a very rare partnership with Washington Wild. We've been able to make that happen together, looking at wilderness boundaries, looking at trail alignments, looking at what gives us the best access for both mountain bikers and resource protection. It's very unique. It's been a very treasured partnership, and I look forward to that partnership for 40 more years.
Washington Wild brings people together in the vigorous defense of our remaining ancient forests, free-flowing rivers, wildlife wildlife habitat, and clean air and water.
My name is Brian Clattisby, chairman of the Swinomish Tribe, and when Swinomish partnered with Washington Wild, we knew it was going to be a good fit to oppose this mining in the headwaters of the Skagit River, which is the only one in the lower 48 that still has every species of wild salmon still spawning in its tributaries. And in 7 generations, our kids need to be standing here telling the same story to those that need to know.
While much has changed over the past 40 years, our national parks, forests, and other public lands are under increasing threats from unregulated mining, new dam construction, and other development.
You must have good quality water to make good quality beer. Being a craft brewer and a fairly small craft brewer compared to the big breweries, we're reliant on producing a quality, consistent product. So locally, we try and do a lot to keep our river clean and pure. And working with Washington Wild, it just helps to expand that throughout the state to keep our natural resources pure. And as a brewery, it's just so important.
Key to their success is building powerful grassroots networks and winning coalitions around protecting our public lands and wild places.
The mission of Washington Wild to make sure that we preserve low areas where families can have access and for salmon spawning is really critical over the coming 50 years, because that's the kind of wilderness that we will be able to use for generations to come. Washington Wild does a great job that's very unique. It brings together communities, different partnerships to be able to establish the road to get wilderness through Congress. It's not easy to pass legislation. You have to bring people in a community together, different organizations, bring together a whole coalition of people to get the kind of energy to get legislation through Congress. That's what Washington Wild does uniquely and very well.
Join me in supporting Washington Wild's leadership in protecting and defending our local wild lands and waters today and for the next 40 years.
Awesome. I hope you all enjoyed that cool video. I know it's making me want to get out back into nature, as I'm sure all of you are feeling that as well. So next up, I want to do a quick introduction. We're going to hear from Travis Merrigan of GRAYL. So we're so excited to have Travis on the call with us today. GRAYL is a really cool company that focuses on state-of-the-art water purifiers to take with you when you're going on, adventures all across the state of Washington and around the world. They've been a 1% for the planet business since they opened their doors, and have been so generous to Washington Wild with everything from product donations for our events to doing percentage of sales fundraisers for us. And as a small nonprofit, we're a staff of 6 people. These kinds of partnerships are so incredibly important for us and to us as an organization. So thank you so much to GRAYL and Travis for all your support. And I'm gonna put it over to you, Travis.
Thank you, guys. And thank you everybody for joining here. When we were deciding to become a 1% for the Planet member, it was a challenging decision. It's a lot of cash, but it was really rooted in what we believe and what all of our employees hold deeply onto. And it's really helped us a lot to attract and retain awesome employees and to really attract customers as well. When we were interviewing nonprofits, I spoke to Tom early on and asked him what they do. And he was telling us that all the easy stuff in Washington has already been protected. He called it the rock and ice. right? All the wilderness areas in Washington State are high up in mountains, and it's pretty easy to protect because nobody wants to put a farm there. Nobody's going to build a city on top of a mountain. And the next battles are over the areas that are much easier to access. So we're talking about trees that are easy to cut down and rivers that are really easy to exploit with things like motorized suction dredge mining, which is such an awful name. Earlier on, I fancied myself to be an explorer. I love being on a mountain bike and getting out way further than the hikers and the campers could go, and just seeing that stuff that's way, way deep. Then I had a couple of kids. I have 2 kids now, 2 and 5, and they don't like to go deep. They don't like it where it's cold. But I still really want for them to have authentic outdoor experiences and places where they can just see amazing things. And that's where the places that are closer in are so important. Places where it's really easy to cut down that 150-foot tree, or to dredge mine in the river that's really close to the road. And that's what Washington Wild works to protect, and that really influenced us. I live in Bremerton, which is across the Puget Sound from Seattle. And so the Olympics are right in my backyard. I'm looking at them right now outside of my window. And Washington Wild has a lot of projects really close to within the Olympic Peninsula, places where we recreate. My own family recreates, places where we've gone and spent nights in tents, and you can hear salmon spawning. If you go there in October and November, there's nobody there. It's too cold for most people, but you can go to a tent in a national forest or a state park, and the salmon are spawning up the river as you're sleeping. You can hear them. Your kids can see them, and those are incredibly special places, incredibly special moments. And if we're gonna protect these places for the next generation, the places that are close in, not just the rock and ice, the close in places have to be protected, and that's what Washington Wild does. If there's anything this last 3.5 years have taught us, is that there's really powerful forces who want to take those places away, and would like nothing better than for them to be exploited by oil and gas and mining and who knows what. And the world really needs strong, powerful nonprofits supported by individuals and supported by companies who have not exploitation in mind, but protection for future generations, so that they can also, years from now, experience what my kids get to experience right now. So GRAYL is super stoked to support Washington Wild and work with organizations like Trout Unlimited and all the other organizations that participated in this banning of, let me say it one more time, motorized suction dredge mining. Oh my God, what a terrible set of words. So congratulations to everybody who worked so hard on passing this bill. Congratulations to Washington Wild. And let me offer a toast to everybody's here, everybody who cares about this. Thank you so much for caring, and congratulations on this victory. But let's not get satisfied. Let's keep working hard for the next one. So cheers to everybody.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Travis. That was really, really great. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom Uniacke, our executive director.
Well, thanks, Chris. Thanks, Travis, for the kind words. It's been great to work with you. And if folks don't know about GRAYL, GRAYL, look it up. His business is clean water. So it's been a really great partnership. So I'm gonna throw a couple slides at you. For those that don't know, many on the call here, know all too much about motorized suction dredge mining. But for those that don't, I'm going to run through a little tutorial here. So it's about protecting the investment in our rivers and salmon and orca recovery. 3 things that I think we all care about. Next slide. So motorized suction dredge mining, there's that word. What is that? Well, it's basically a mining that happens on our rivers. You got a float and basically a souped up vacuum cleaner that sucks up gravel, sediment, and whatever else through a tube, separates that out, hoping to get some gold or rare metals, but then dumps all that stuff back into the river. Next slide. So where does this happen? This map shows the red reaches of river are the critical salmon habitat that's been designated for endangered salmon, bull trout, and steelhead fish by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And those yellow dots, those are hot spots of where a lot of this motorized suction dredge mining is happening. And you can see that there's a lot of overlap between those two things, which isn't good. This happens in quite a bit in the Skykomish, Skagit, Nooksack watersheds. It also happens like in a place like Nason Creek, where most activities, whether it be swimming or fishing or whatnot, have been closed because of the important habitat to fish. But previous regulations did not prohibit motorized suction dredge mining from happening in the same place. Next slide. So why do we care? Well, motorized suction dredge mining is kind of a salmon's worst nightmare. Basically it disrupts the riverbed by taking gravel out, putting it back in. Metals like mercury and whatnot get raised up in the water column. Sediment gets pushed up in the column, changing the temperature of the stream. A lot of impacts to fish, their habitat, and the eggs that are real detrimental by this practice. Next slide. And it's not just fish, but it's also orcas. So as we've all learned in the last 2 years, our endangered orca populations in the Puget Sound, they eat salmon, at least the southern killer resident population is, and Chinook salmon for the most part. And this habitat's important to as a prey source for orca, and orcas are important for all of us that love to watch them and know that they're here, but also economically. They're a big impact, and probably most importantly, they're super important to our tribes, for their tribal lifeways and treaty rights. So that's connected to, orca recovery as well. Next slide. So this is about safeguarding investment in salmon recovery, right? So nearly $1 billion has been spent to recover and restore salmon streams by state, municipal, federal governments, as well as nonprofits and tribes, and so all that investment has been going in. And, when the previous regulations, which were really a low bar, when motorized suction dredge mining happens, like in a day, it could cancel out potentially millions of dollars of investment that's been happened, just by, 1 day of looking for gold flakes. So that's the issue, and that's the goal here. So legislation was, oh, sorry, next slide. Legislation was put into the state legislature, and that's the bill numbers. It was a balanced piece of legislation. The number one thing it did was protect, basically ban motorized suction dredge mining in the most important areas, those that were critical habitat that were designated for endangered fish, right? And then as for motorized suction dredge mining elsewhere, that was allowed to continue, monitored by Clean Water Act rules. And then non-motorized suction dredge mining could also happen. So it wasn't banning it everywhere, but in the most important places where we've put all our investment. Next slide. So Washington Wild kind of joined this coalition that was already, happening, and it led by just a lot of really great groups and people. Trout Unlimited, Sierra Club, both had lobbyists in Olympia and done an excellent job of just, really making all of that happen. That's so necessary to pass a bill. Fish Not Gold, Kim McDonald, just really is kind of the content source. She knows where all this stuff's happening and all the details. And then, the Snoqualmie tribe, Matt Barwaldi, who's on the call with us today, just is actually the first time I actually heard of this. I was meeting with him, and I asked him what he was working on, and asked if he needed help with a letter. And that was the first time I ever heard about that this was going on in our rivers. So what we contributed here is, our skill set is bringing diverse groups together as a statewide organization, which can be hard. But when you do so, it looks something like this, a coalition of 160 conservation, recreation, and wildlife groups, local businesses, elected officials, faith leaders, tribes, all saying that they want reform of this practice for salmon. And when you get all those folks on one piece of paper, it's one-stop shopping for state legislators. It makes their job easy. And frankly, they don't see it that often. So I think that was a big impact. Next slide. So of those 160 groups, I just put this little graphic together, was playing around on the internet. and you can't see all of them because there's 160, but you know, I thought that was cool just to show of all the groups that work to make this happen. Next slide. We also, Washington Wild also really helped coordinate kind of a media response, which is something we have experience doing. So we really wanted to make sure that local papers were raising this issue to their readers about how important it was, and whether around the state, whether it's the Seattle Times or the Everett Herald, or on the east side, the Yakima Herald or Wenatchee World, you know, working with the coalition to get opinion editorials, op-eds, letters to the editor and articles printed. And then when our local legislators who are voting on this thing see that in their district, in their local paper, you know, it matters. It's kind of bottom up. Next slide. So then it happened on March 18th. There's Jay Inslee signing the bill, right? It's a big deal. Doesn't happen all that often. It's a lot of work, and Crystal will tell us how much work that was in a couple minutes. Yeah, that's what we're celebrating tonight. And next slide. Even though that was a big victory, there's still a few things that we need to get done. So after the call, if you want to go to WashingtonWild.org, the Take Action page, this bill goes into effect on June 11th, but the two agencies, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife and the Washington Department of Ecology, need to come up with regulations that basically are going to implement that law. And it's real important that those regulations are as strong as the law is. And so you can send an email to them just ensuring that they, you know, capture the intent of this law and make sure that it's implemented going forward. So with that, I'm going to introduce just our next quick speaker, who is Crystal Elliot Perez. She is the Washington Habitat Director for Trout Unlimited, which is a great organization that cares about fish and is, you know, sports fishermen for the most part, and really care about conservation. And Crystal's been involved with this for probably, you know, or Trout Unlimited for a decade. And so while Washington Wild came in and tried to really, you know, help out the last 2 years or so, there's a lot of work that came and was done before then. So Crystal, if you want to take over and share some context about everything that went into making this happen, we'd love to hear it.
Thanks so much for the warm welcome, Tom. Really appreciate you having me on tonight. The victory is a long time coming, 7.5 years to be exact, and it has been hard fought by so many dedicated conservationists and advocates like all of you on the phone tonight. And here's my little advocate with me right now. Tom asked me to tell you a little bit about the history of the coalition. I decided the best way to do that is by following the thread of gratitude for the people that made this happen. It all started for me on a hot August day in 2013 in the Central Cascade Mountains when I was out with the Forest Service walking Swat Creek, which is critical habitat for steelhead. We came upon a suction dredging operation complete with scuba gear, a huge hose, and a generator on pontoons, and it had excavated a huge hole in the stream bed, and it looked like a bomb that had gone off. And I asked the Forest Service staffer how in the heck these folks were allowed to do this, and she shrugged her shoulders and wrung her hands and said, well, so, you know, something about the golden fish pamphlet. And so mouth agape and smelling something fishy, I contacted every resource agency staff person I knew to get to the bottom of why this harmful practice was allowed without a permit, and basically with no oversight whatsoever, even in critical habitat for salmon and steelhead. And so what I learned was that suction dredging was happening across the state, even in places where the salmon populations were on the brink of extinction, like the South Fork Nooksack. And I also learned that a small but vocal and belligerent group of bizarrely managed to keep regulators and legislators at bay for decades. So little did I know, Kim McDonald, the founder of Fish Not Gold, was doing the same sleuthing on her end, as well as badgering her state representative, Gail Tarleton, to introduce a bill to ban suction dredging in critical habitat. So imagine that. Here we are. The two of us found each other, and we've been raising hell ever since. One of the main hurdles we had to overcome was the fact that nobody besides suction dredgers and regulators knew what the heck suction dredging was. So So two grassroots members across the state rose to the challenge and have been applying relentless optimism relentlessly ever since. Derek Young, Pat Hesselgesser, Jim Burns, Steve Miller, Brad Throssell, Bob Stroop, Mark Taylor, Leah Hemberry, and so many others. Forgive me for not being able to mention them all. Getting the word out and outreach to legislators and agency staff at all levels. Clark Skamania Fly Fishers doing the same thing down on the Lewis and tirelessly advocating clinching some key and shocking Republican yes votes. The Snoqualmie Tribe, Mount Bearwald has been with us on the front lines from the beginning. Nooksack Tribe, Yakima Nation, Upper Skagit, Sauk-Suiattle tribes, all fighting their own battles on this issue in their home waters. Center for Biological Diversity and Cascadia Wildlands, we're taking the legal track in Oregon and poised to do the same in Washington. So many others across Washington doing their part and speaking up individually to voice their concerns on this issue. And so recognizing our voices were much stronger together, the coalition was born in 2014 and we've been growing ever since. We held outreach events, so thank you to Patagonia, Emerald Water Anglers, Iron Horse Brewery, and Aslan Brewing. We sent out action alerts tabled at public events. Conservation organizations, fly fishing guides, tribes, lovers of clean water and fish. We all applied relentless pressure to WDFW and fought hard to pass legislation in every legislative session starting in 2014. Our ask started small, just for asking for tracking and accountability, which seemed beyond a no-brainer, but still didn't fly over the years. But then over the years, as our coalition got bigger, our asks got bolder. We gained critical momentum in 2019 when our savvy friends like Sierra Club and Washington Wild began applying their organizing expertise and political prowess to the issue, along with much higher public awareness of salmon issues that came with the Orca crisis, in combination with the critical court decisions in Oregon and California, which were fighting their own battles, and regulatory changes in other Western states. This really tipped the scales in our favor and set the stage for success in 2020. We owe a huge debt of gratitude to Representative Gail Tarleton, Rep. Fitzgibbon, Rep. Peterson, Senator Palumbo, and Senator Solomon as prime bill sponsors, and all the other legislators that supported us on this issue over the years. We went from having a very small group of concerned legislators to an impressive bipartisan support in both chambers in 2020. Truly a miraculous feat. And some of those really hard-fought legislators, Republican legislators in Central Washington, Eastern Washington, and in Southwest Washington. Thanks go to Clark Skamania Fly Fishers, Steve Jones and his crew, and Pat Hesselgesser, Derek Young in Central Washington. Turning Republican legislators from no votes, staunch no votes, to yes votes is just incredible through their advocacy, tireless advocacy. So once again, I want to give a shout out to Washington Wild for organizing the incredible sign-on letter. This is a really, really critical piece for gaining such broad support in the legislature. So many people, too many to name, came together in ways to make this incredible victory happen. So Washington has gone from the Western state with the worst section dredge regulations to having the most protective regulations in the nation. So I want to thank you all from the very bottom of my heart for your tireless advocacy. And this is a huge win for the waterways of Washington state.
Awesome. Thanks, Crystal. I'm going to shoot it over to my colleague, Evan, now. You there, Evan?
I'm here.
Cool.
Wow, Crystal, like I'm fired up, after you said all that. That's amazing. Like, in these moments, we were talking about this as a staff and, planning out our program. And, so often it seems like when we have these victories or, I'm in development and fundraising and, you hit the goal and then you move on to the next thing. And, we don't take a moment to come together and really reflect back on the incredible, win and victory, that this is. And I know we toasted at the beginning, but Crystal, man, your speech was just like, it got me really fired up, and it makes me really, appreciate what we do and what we're working for, and what we spend our livelihood, trying to protect these places. I loved how you brought, your child on. I got a little 4-year-old guy, and so you're always thinking about the future and, what's going to be here for them. And so really just, thinking back about all the time and energy and work that goes into, making this a reality is incredible. And it does take a lot of people and a lot of diverse groups and a lot of, finding common ground to be able to make this happen. And so, Crystal, thank you again so much for joining us, for everything that you've done. Travis as well, thank you for joining us and being a strong partner of Washington Wild. And just thinking back, again, Tom had mentioned this, what role, Washington Wild, plays in this. And it is pretty unique. We're a statewide organization, and we do focus on bringing, people together, different stakeholders around Washington State, creating those sign-on letters. So it is, as Tom said, that one-stop shop. If we can have 170, 500, 1,000, community voices together and bringing that, to our congressional partners and saying, we all believe in this and this is our one message, it makes it so much easier for them to go on to the next step. We as well as, activating our local media, and it shows our community how we can get involved, putting out those action alerts and just giving people, that opportunity to take that next step with us. So, this victory, like many others, it takes time and energy to get passed into law. And so, our work, like with the Wild Sky Wilderness, that took 9 years. The Alpine Lakes editions, that took 8 years. What we're doing right now with the Wild Olympics, that's, been a better part of a decade. And the point is to recognize that, things get passed in the law, but it takes time and funding. So right now, we're in the middle of our spring campaign, and we're proud to share with everybody that we've raised over $21,000 towards our ultimate goal of $30,000. And that funding, allows us to continue to do what we do best, which is finding that common ground with community and corporate partners, building our coalitions, and working together, to protect these areas for years to come. So if you're able, you can make a gift to Washington Wild today for any amount that's meaningful to you. You can do that on our website, which is wawild.org, wildwild.org. And again, this was, I'm really glad that we're continuing to do these virtual happy hours. It's a great way to connect with so many people around the state and around our community, and just thinking about the positives, looking towards the future and hope. And so thank you again all for joining us, and I will pass it back to Chris, and I think we got a little bit of time for some Q&A.
Yeah, thanks, Evan. So yeah, we're gonna do a quick Q&A. So if you have any questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and we'll get to them. So I'm gonna start it off by asking Tom, who is opposed to these kinds of regulations?
Yeah, well, Crystal mentioned it. Motorized section dredge miners don't like the regulations, and who are those guys, right? Like, let me tell you what they're not. They're not big mining businesses that employ, hundreds of people. That's not, and it's not and job producing. They're more or less folks that are very passionate about, kind of looking for gold in the river, but it's more of a hobby or kind of occupational kind of pursuit. So but they've been doing that for a long time, and as Crystal pointed out, we went from the worst regulations on this thing to the strongest. So there was probably a little bit of like, what do you mean I can't do this? I've been doing this forever. Well, when it comes to salmon and the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been invested, a kind of change was needed.
Cool, thanks, Tom. Unless we have any more questions or any more comments, I think we're gonna wrap it up here. But I wanted to thank everyone for joining us for another one of these happy hours. I think I can speak for the Washington Wild staff in saying that we really enjoy doing these, and being able to connect with our community during this time is really, really fantastic. And thank you so much to all the coalition members that work so tirelessly to make this these regulations a reality. So cheers to everybody. We'll probably be back for another one of these. We've got one in the works, so look out for that on your emails or through our social media pages. Yeah, thank you so much, and we'll see you next time.
All right, thank you. Congrats.